All right. Welcome to those of you at mochurch.tv. Welcome you guys in person here. So, Hannibal Lecter, one of the creepiest characters that's ever been created in literature and then later in film. Hello, Clarice. I mean, just has this way with a couple of words to get under your skin. Before Hannibal Lecter hit the big screen, he was first a literary character in some novels by a dude named Thomas Harris. In fact, I have a friend, the church I used to work at in the Washington, D.C. area, who was a former FBI agent. He was the equivalent of some X amount of star general in the FBI. His name is Ron Ferguson. This is his son, Pat. Both of them were on staff at the church where I was at. Ron, after he retired from the FBI, I had rapper nicknames for everybody that was on staff there. So Ron was Ron DMC, and Pat was Puff Patty, and his wife's name really was Kim, so she was Little Kim. And so everyone had nicknames. And so, anyways, Ron, when he was in the FBI, before I met him, dude, he was high up, and he wrote the manual for the polygraph. He had a master's in forensic science. And, I mean, he was a stud and got me on, like, a cool inside tour FBI building and the Hoover building. It's really cool. But he told me he was at one time approached as a consultant for the first film adaptation from the Hannibal Lecter books. The first book is called Red Dragon, but back before they made the movie Red Dragon with Anthony Hopkins in it, they originally in 1986 made a movie called Manhunter that Anthony Hopkins wasn't even Hannibal Lecter in yet. And so they asked him, what's some kind of cool piece of evidence that, you know, came from your FBI experience that we could use to move the plot along that would be interesting in a movie? And Ron gave him some interesting different details, and one of the things he said was, well, one time we did lift a fingerprint off the eyeball of a corpse, and that ended up being in Manhunter as like a way that they found out about this killer whose name was the Tooth Fairy. And so, like, wow, that's really cool. And he also talked to them about how one might communicate from prison or from a mental hospital or whatever through the newspaper, through newspaper articles by coding and stuff. And he was like, man, that's really, really cool. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar with Hannibal Lecter, how many, by round of applause, have ever read or seen a film about Hannibal Lecter? Okay, so a lot of you, even some toddlers included. Let's talk about Hannibal Lecter. So metaphorically speaking here, by day, Hannibal Lecter is this respected forensic psychiatrist. He's intellectually brilliant. Like, he's the kind of guy I'd love to sit down with and talk to, because you're like, man, how in the world does his mind think like this? He knows so much. He's extremely cultured and sophisticated, very refined tastes in art and music and cuisine. In fact, he's one of those guys that knows how to pair the right wines with the right foods. I know nothing about that. And so he's also deeply offended by rudeness. He's very, like, you know, he knows etiquette and things like that, very deeply offended by rudeness. So before he was captured and thrown in prison, he lived in Baltimore, fictionally, and he was a member of Baltimore's social elite, and he was even on the board of directors for the Baltimore Philharmonic, very cultured. But, metaphorically, by night, Hannibal Lecter is a serial killer and a cannibal. You're like, man, that's so weird, so intelligent, so cultured, and all this stuff. And since he's deeply offended by rudeness, he frequently kills people who have bad manners. You know, like, that's the thing, like, it grated on me, the way that they didn't say thank you, that kind of thing. And so he's frequently portrayed as, you know, eating and preparing gourmet meals of his victims' body parts or flesh. And so then there's this epic line from that video we just watched where he says, a census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, you know? You're like, man, just so crazy how creepy this very smart intellectual dude can be. And within those stories, this is in the film too, but in those novels, there's a guy named Dr. Chilton who's Lecter's keeper at the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane, and he's really an arrogant character, this doctor is. But he says Lecter is a pure sociopath. He just feels no remorse whatsoever. And then FBI agent, famously from Silence of the Lambs, for instance, Clarice Starling, hello, Clarice, says they don't have a name for what Hannibal Lecter is. And then there's another famous FBI agent character, for instance, in the book Red Dragon, named Will Graham, and he says of Hannibal Lecter, he's a monster. And so I want to confess to you today and in this series that I believe in monsters. And this morning, I want to confess to you, I very specifically believe in cannibals. Now, we all kind of know, yeah, in real life there are human cannibals, but I know that they exist on the level of Hannibal Lecter. I know that for a fact. In fact, I want to show you today through Scripture that Scripture even talks about them. So turn to Galatians chapter 5. I use many jokes about why I have my 5 tattoo that's on my arm. And this is truly one of them, though, is that it's of Galatians chapter 5 is really, it's my life chapter. It's like there's so many cool things in this one chapter, and that's one of the reasons I did get this 5 tattoo. But so if you go there, you can download the Bible app for free. Go to the NIV version, which is what I'll be using. So back in the first century, when the church was first born, there was a Christian leader whose name was Paul, and he traveled around and he planted or started churches in many different cities in the Mediterranean world. And then he would move on. After being there a year or 2, sometimes 3, he'd move on. Well, a lot of places where he would plant were cities, and this is a place that he refers to in this letter of Galatians that's about a region called Galatia. So Galatia is not a city, unlike some of the other places like Corinth, or Colossae or whatever. And so Paul writes to the Galatians, the people who live in the region of Galatia, and that included several cities. And if you read through the book of Acts, you'll see, 4 of these cities mentioned, and these are cities where some of them where he planted, started the church there, and left, and is now writing to them. But some of those cities are Pisidian Antioch, or Iconium, or Derbe, or Lystra. Those are cities he's writing to in this letter. And so the letter to the Galatians is probably one of Paul's earliest letters found in the New Testament of Scripture. So the problem in Galatia, the reason he's writing in these Galatian churches, 4, I'll probably just refer to them as the Galatian church collectively, but there was some legalistic false teachers. There were some Jewish people who had become Christians, but had this really legalistic view of Jesus. And they were really corrupting the churches, causing a bunch of dissension and spreading a bunch of false doctrine. Now, sometimes to be like, yeah, we can agree to disagree on some stuff, totally fine. But in this case, they were putting more hoops up for people to jump through so that they could follow Jesus. And that is always, no, it's game time. We need to talk about that. So they were saying, before you can become a Christian, first, you need to become a Jew. And before you become a Christian, first, you need to be circumcised. And so they're adding steps to how people can cross the line to become a follower of Jesus. And Paul's like, no, not on my watch. So he writes this letter. The letter largely is about freedom in Christ. Like, there's these legalists among you. I'm telling you, Jesus has set you free from rule books, okay? And so he writes to instruct them on that. In fact, many people throughout the years have called this Paul's great Magna Carta of the Christian faith. Like, this is to set you free. And so, I wish I could preach many sermons on this chapter, but we're going to start today with Galatians 5:1. Paul says in this awesome chapter, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Kind of like a duh. It's for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, Galatians, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Okay, so here's what he's saying. He's saying, you guys were slaves to your sin. You were lost spiritually. But then, because of Jesus' cross and the resurrection, and you putting faith in Christ, Christ set you free. Like, life in Christ is freedom. So he's saying, so why would you then, as a free person, choose to go back into another form of slavery, legalism? Like, why would you do that? That's like saying, I made it through the Underground Railroad, thanks, I'm going back. I made it out of Egypt as an Israelite. That was cool, the thing with the Red Sea. But I'm going to get a boat, and I'm going to go back across the Red Sea and go back to Egypt. Why would you do that? You have been set free from sin, which you were slaves to, set free by Christ. Why would you go back to any other type of slavery, which is legalism? Then he says later on in verse 13, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge in the flesh, the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. The way I'd paraphrase this is, you have been completely set free, but don't use your freedom as a laminated card to be a bonehead. Like, don't use it for selfish desires and to do selfish things. Instead, serve one another. This is, in my opinion, this is almost poetic what Paul is doing right here. He says this. He's saying, you were slaves to sin. Jesus, by the cross and the resurrection, set you free, and you put faith in him, so you've been freed. Why would you ever go into some other type of slavery like legalism? And here's the deal. You have been set free, so use your freedom to become slaves to one another. Like, you are free to love and serve one another. So be slaves to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. Serve the person next to you. Like, it's so beautiful, the imagery that he uses to be clear. This is about freedom, but Jesus set you free to love one another without insecurity, without competition. You're free. You don't have to do that stuff. God loves you unconditionally. Rest in that. Be free to love and serve one another. And then he goes on, this next little chunk, repeating kind of like one of the previous phrases. Serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law, the whole Old Testament is fulfilled in keeping this one command, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, Paul, he's implying, he thinks it's implicit that these Galatians understand. Jesus said the number one commandment of everything was love God. And then this is Jesus' second most important commandment, which is love people. And he's saying you're free to do that now. So, if we follow that progression of thought, slaves to sin, set free by Jesus. Why would you go back into slavery of legalism? But you in your freedom can choose to be slaves to one another, to serve one another. Why is Paul saying all this in chapter 5? There must have been a bunch of fighting going on in the Galatian churches. And we know that there was stuff going on because of the false doctrine of these people called Judaizers, those legalistic false teachers. So there must have been more going on and fighting coming from that and people breaking up into groups and dissensions and all this kind of stuff, because he goes on in verse 15 and he says next to them, if you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. And in the Greek, destroyed also would be translated consumed. That's what it means, destroyed by consumption. You will destroy each other. So, I believe in monsters, and I believe in cannibals. I think there's scriptural proof to say that human cannibals exist. Cannibals are humans who bite and devour and consume and ultimately destroy their own kind. And in this case, they're Christian humans who are turning on one another, turning on their own species, if you will, and they're biting and devouring, consuming, and destroying. Author Warren Wiersbe, just looking at the seriousness of how spiritually these Christians are harming one another. He says, the picture here is of wild animals attacking each other. Just like wild animals from the same species, like jackals, just tearing each other apart. And it's like a ravenous bunch of bloodthirsty sharks just tearing into one another and destroying themselves. A cannibalistic civil war going on in the Galatian churches. And so one proactive picture we see, because in the New Testament, there's so much teaching about, man, beware of this kind of infighting, this biting, devouring, consuming, destroying one another. One proactive example is Paul writes to his protege, his spiritual disciple, Timothy, and he tells Timothy this: don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments because you know they produce quarrels. Isn't that great that that's in Scripture? Like, don't have anything to do, Timothy. Like, you're young, and I just want to warn you, before you get into leadership, before you make it any further, don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments. I didn't even know there was social media in the first century. That's crazy. Are you kidding me? Oh, man, that's incredible. But that's an example of, like, Timothy, beware. This leads to cannibalism. You will end up turning on your own kind, thinking they're the enemy, and you will bite and devour and consume and destroy one another, your own kind, your own species. How in the world do human beings end up being human cannibals? Like, how does that happen? Well, one way that it often happens is when you allow yourself to become either person A or person C. And what I mean by that is, often this happens through something called triangulation. There are three people. Let's just say they could be from the same Mo group, because we're going to hone in on Christian cannibals. From the same Mo group, they could be greeters together on Sunday morning. They could be in student ministry together, high school students or middle school students, or a mixture of both. And what happens is person B does something that's perceived as an offense to person A. Okay? And person A is not happy about it. It might be overt. They may have said, your daughter is such a garden tool. I saw her kissing a boy. You with me on the garden tool? Okay, so, and so like, what, you just call my daughter a garden tool? I will, And so, or it could be something really like it's a perceived offense. Like, I wasn't invited to something that person B hosted, or I saw them, but they didn't say hi. There's always that chance they didn't see you. It's happened to me. People have been mad at me. I didn't speak to them, didn't talk to them. And I was like, you whispered in my ear over the band. I never heard you said last week you whispered. That actually happened one time. Like, you didn't respond to a question I asked. And little did I know they had leaned over from behind me and asked me a question in the blaring loud worship music at Cinemark Theater in Valley View, and I never heard them. And they were like, so ticked at me the next week. I didn't hear you. What is going on right now? So there's a perceived offense. So instead of person A talking about that perceived offense to person B, person A, of course, and the only thing to do here is to find a third person, right? Is to go to a mutual friend who also knows person B and like, can you believe? Now, I'm going to apologize because I'm going to default to female voices mostly for this, but I'm going to get beyond that, okay? It's not totally sexism. I'm getting to male examples. But, like, can you believe she said garden tool? Oh, my goodness. Your daughter's not a garden tool. I know. She's not even French kissed before. Okay, we got this going on. Now, what in the world happens there is that you've got A, who's a perceived victim. Go back. You got A, who's a perceived victim, and then person B, who's the perceived monster. I mean, they could have done something truly offensive, or it could be a misunderstanding. That's often the case. And then you got person C, who's just the mutual friend. And triangulation happens when person A should be talking to person B, but instead they go to person C, and they create this sidebar conversation. And it's all in the spirit of working it out. They're like working it out, and they vent. And they feel maybe comforted by person C, like maybe that's the shoulder to cry on, and person C is just so sweet and nice, that they're shoulder to cry on or whatever. And the problem is that when they're done, person A never feels like, okay, they feel like mostly it's resolved. I feel better about it because I vented, and so there's nothing else that needs to be done in this situation. But one of the problems is that if there really was something, an offense or even an oversight by person B, they never get to hear something that maybe they need to hear. Like, if you truly love this person and want the best for them, want them to grow, and you want your relationship to move forward, person B never hears about that thing that maybe they need to hear about. And so the reality of the situation ultimately becomes this, is that person A is most definitely become a cannibal. I mean, even if this was a true offense, well, now you've made the choice to say, okay, I'm truly becoming a cannibal, and I'm going to bite, devour, consume, and destroy. By going to person C, person B becomes a definite victim. Even if they did something that was offensive, now you have truly, clearly done an offense against them. You've sinned against them, and now person C is a potential cannibal. How will person C respond? Like, that is to be seen in these situations, is how person C might respond to person A. And person C needs to be aware of Proverbs 18:8, which is the words of a gossip, that person A coming to you, are like choice morsels, aren't they? Like, to get the dirt, right? This is like fine Hannibal cuisine. I mean, what do we call, what's the adjective we use for gossip? It's what? Juicy. Like, person C off to their spouse then. you will not believe what happened to person A and B. It's some juicy gossip, you know? It's like, oh, there's something that's so tasty about that. Something so, I got the inside scoop, but like Hannibal Lecter, you're feasting on something that's destructive and deplorable. Like, this is a really bad situation. It's like the person's not present, but you've got their liver, and you're eating it with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, okay? That's what's happening right here. Now, a lot of cannibalism happens when you've got two or more people who they kind of cannibalize. They attack their own, and they bite, devour, consume, and destroy. And this other person that they're talking about, it makes these guys feel like our relationships moving forward, we have more to connect on. We're relationally advancing because we have a common enemy, right? Like now we got this person that we both feel like, oh, I know. Isn't she always like that? Isn't that just like him? He's so arrogant. Like we've got a common enemy. It makes us feel like we've bonded more, but that's so fake, isn't it? Like that actual relational connection is such a fake, false connection and totally not real relationship. And what you have is two cannibals, biting, devouring, consuming, and destroying. I love that someone once said this is so insightful. Slander is something you say behind someone's back that you would never say to their face. Flattery is something you say to someone's face that you would never say behind their back. So insightful. And what makes this really tough is sometimes it's with like a couple, a dating couple or a married couple. And if you're married, like sometimes, and this is where I've had like one particular guy friend tell me one time, he's like, man, I kind of woke up one day and realized me and my wife, we gossip so much. Now, usually guys don't relate to that word gossip, but there are a lot of guys who gossip. And they just don't use that because it feels like there's something effeminate about that word because it's usually stereotypically a girl sin, okay? And so, or in the middle school bathroom. And so, like, he was like, man, me and my wife are gossips. Like, we'll be sitting there at dinner and we realize we're picking apart and criticizing and, poking fun at someone's failure or their inconsistencies, their flaws, whatever it is. And then they realize they look down at their dinner, it's a liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, okay? Like, wow, we have turned into cannibals. And it really takes someone strong in that relationship, the man or the woman, to say, man, I feel like we're starting to gossip a lot. Like, I feel like we have to, like, cut that off and stop talking about, criticizing, making fun of, bickering, venting, complaining about other people and say, man, we got to work on that and self-police that together. Matthew 18, Jesus has one of the cures for human cannibalism. Jesus said this. He said, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. Dos. Just person A, go directly to person B. It eliminates the triangulation. Like, just think of how many problems this helps not be created in the world if we do things Jesus' way. We eliminate triangulation, and we eliminate the chance for cannibalism. And so to combat cannibalism from happening in Jesus' church, in this movement of Jesus followers and Jesus people, one of those would be Momentum Church, is to say, I need to decide in advance what I'm going to do if I'm possibly person A or if I am person C. Like in advance, what will I do in that situation? And this is tough because some people are like, man, I avoid awkward conversations at all costs, but it's at the expense of your relationships that you do that. And so, maybe person A, like, man, I'm hurt, upset, offended by someone at Momentum. I'm going to go directly to them just between the two. I'm not going to send off an angry email, a PM, post something on Facebook, whatever it is. I'm going to sit down with the two of them, or if I'm trying to be socially distant, I'll do it on Zoom, and we will talk so we can see each other's facial expressions. And remember, this person that you're thinking about eating, biting, consuming is another human being. And often that softens the tone and redirects the conversation. I'm telling you, I've gone into so many difficult conversations with people, sometimes where people are coming at me because maybe I hurt or offended them. Other times where I'm like going into a situation where I'm certain There is no chance this person has any reason for what they did or in the right. And you know what? I go in leading with questions and I found out, man, I had no idea. Where could this possibility have come from that they actually, I can see their point of view on this. But when I go in prayerfully, humbly, and leading with questions, sometimes I find another piece of the story and I'm like, oh, Dan, you are such a schmuck. Like you thought you knew everything there was to know about why this happened. So I've learned to lead with questions because often there's more to the story, and person B isn't as guilty as I thought they were. They were a perceived monster. And if you're person C and a cannibal comes to you to gossip, man, it is really difficult for some people to decline to join in. And just to say, man, that's funny. I also know so-and-so in our Mo group or who greets or who's in student ministry, and that doesn't sound much like them. Have you talked to so-and-so about them? You send them back to close the triangle. You say, okay, this is not something, I don't feel comfortable talking about them when they're not here. Why don't you go talk to them about them? Or I'm going to mention to them that you have something to talk to them about. Ooh, when you help them out, that's really like, oh no. Like if I don't do it, you're going to mention to them, yeah, so-and-so brought something up. He was a little bit hacked about a thing that happened. Have you guys talked about that yet? Oh, dang it, now I actually have to man up. Now I actually have to talk about the perceived offense. I know a guy who talked about a Christian family. I think this is so cool. This Christian family was kind of like a home away from home for him, almost like a third place. He's got, home and work. And this was kind of like his place where he hung out. And it was with this family, dinner with them, he'd hang out with them, whatever. He said, but this family, this Christian family, had a plaque above their doorpost that said this: the absent are safe here. Think about that for a second. The absent are safe here. And what he meant by that is, I know when I leave, I'm not in danger of them talking about me. When I go there and I tell them my disappointments, the things that hurt me, things from my past that, yeah, these are my flaws, these are some things, mistakes I've made in the past, that those aren't just juicy morsels, that when I leave, oh, they're just going to start ravenously tearing me apart, picking on me. Oh, yeah, he's still kind of like that, isn't he? Oh, yeah, he hasn't grown much in that area. That kind of stuff. He knows when he leaves, the absent are safe here. They're not going to turn into a family of ravenous cannibals who are going to tear me apart. And also, when someone in their home speaks ill of me, they are going to be the first to say the absent are safe here. That doesn't sound like him to us. We know him really well. He comes over for dinner a lot. Have you ever talked to him about that? They're a good person C when that choice morsel pops up of gossip, of like, no, that just doesn't sound like them at all. The absent are safe here. What a great vision for men's ministry at Momentum. Like, what a great idea for like a value or an axiom to have in student ministry at Momentum. I know, but he's just a middle schooler. I know those middle schoolers are so immature, blah, blah, blah. Nope. The absent are safe here. She didn't show up this week, but she's not in danger. People aren't going to pick her apart and cannibalize her if she doesn't show up at student ministry one week. The absent are safe here. Women's ministry, your Mo group. What a great axiom for your Mo group. When someone isn't there, you don't have to worry about people huddling up after Mo group and talking bad about you. Stephen Covey once said in his classic 7 Habits, he said, one of the most important ways to manifest integrity is to be loyal to those who are not present. In doing so, we build the trust of those who are present. If you're a gossip, even if you got somebody else who loves those juicy gossip morsels with you, eventually when there's a rift between the two of you, you both leave that knowing the absent are not safe. Like now, she's going to do what she's always done with me, and she is going to gossip about me, and suddenly I am going to be walking around like, man, I feel like my liver just hurts a little bit because she's off somewhere with fine cuisine, just dining on your liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, okay? So that's what happens, but you build trust when you say, no, that's not going to happen. Like, I don't feel comfortable talking about that person. You realize with that person, they have integrity. The absent are safe here. They're doing the Jesus thing. What's cool in the rest of this chapter is Galatians 5, Paul goes on, and there's 2 famous lists in the rest of this chapter. One is a list of examples. It's not exhaustive, of the acts of the flesh, which means your sinful nature, the things that you are selfishly drawn to, things for self-preservation, things, for gratification, whatever. These are acts of the flesh. And they're broken up, if you'll notice in your text, that they're broken up in 4 groups. Comma, 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 comma. Okay. Then there's a semicolon which breaks up a group, meaning they're grouped together on purpose by Paul. And so the third one, it's really interesting. Like these two are like trying to control the supernatural. And then here we get into what I'd say is relational selfishness. Like hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, and envy. Like this is the cannibalism list right here. Like this is the relational selfishness stuff. And so just to lean into for a second, the one word I highlighted here, factions. Factions comes from a word, a verb, that means to choose. And what it means is to choose sides on an issue, okay? We're going to break up on this issue. And so when God's people divide into factions, groups, camps around a particular issue, or a champion of that issue, what Paul's saying is that's an urge of our sinful nature. Like that's an urge of the way that we are not built to seek God based on the reverberations of sin through humanity. That we're all born with our steering knocked out of alignment. And that's one of the ways that we see that steering being knocked out of alignment, us veering off toward selfishness and indulgence, whatever it is, gratification. And so he's saying factions, they're an example of that. Factions are an example. Here's the deal. We human beings are so party prone. We are so party prone. The idea, the feeling that we can get together in a group to be like, hey, we are really right. Aren't we so right? I know. Can you even imagine what it's like to think like these morons over here? Because they are so wrong. And there's so many levels. We are just so party prone in the church, in politics, in sports. It goes on and on. As consumers, PC versus Mac. Those idiots really think Apple is better. It's just on and on. Factions, that's the sinful nature. We love to get in groups where we tell each other we are so right. But when you're a part of Jesus' church, i.e. one of them, momentum, you have to watch for, and I'd ask you to watch for, us versus them language and attitudes. Like it can happen in so many ways. It can become a Mo group thing, us versus them, that Mo group. Like, well, we do it a little bit better, obviously. It's us. It creeps in subtly before next thing you know, you're like, liver and onions, okay? Just like it happens subtly. It could be online worshipers versus in-person worshipers. Just smart aleck little comments, like they're scared, or these guys aren't being safe. It just really can creep into an us versus them. High school students versus middle school students. It can be former Garfield Heights campus versus former Twinsburg, Macedonia campus. Just like, oh man, things are so different. Well, we did it differently than they did it back in the day. Now that we're together, it's going to be a little bit tougher because the way we did it was clearly better. Hopefully they'll see it eventually. Political lefties versus political righties. We go down that list, faction after faction, but there's a Catholic writer named Henry Nouwen, who just brilliant writer, who wrote this. He said, the forces of darkness are the forces that split, divide, and set in opposition. The forces of light unite. Literally, the word diabolic means dividing. The demon divides, the spirit unites. And that's exactly where Galatians 5 is going with this whole discussion. In fact, after verse 15 about biting, devouring, consuming, destroying, the next verse, Paul says, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. He's saying, if you're a Christian, part of the church, then God's Holy Spirit lives inside you as his house, his dwelling, his temple. So ask God's Spirit, say, Holy Spirit, or Father God, lead me. Help me to walk by your Spirit today. Help me to see things you want me to see that I'm too selfish to notice, but I want to be led by your Spirit today. Take me off my agenda onto your agenda to love and serve in the name of Jesus, things I would usually miss. Or in this situation, this person's coming to me, they're gossiping. In real time, they're gossiping to me, and I'm praying silently, oh, Holy Spirit, how do I respond? Give me the strength, the confidence, the courage to say what needs to be said right now. Like, lead me, Holy Spirit, right now, because I don't feel like I alone have the courage to say, hey, I think you should go talk to that person. The bottom line is the flesh, or sinful nature, says protect and gratify self. That's self-preservation, self-gratification. But the Spirit says drastically different, love and serve others. It's full circle. You have been set free, so choose to be slaves to one another. Use your freedom to love and serve one another. True story. Back in 2005, I know this for a fact that it happened. There were some United States American missionaries who went on a mission trip to Brazil. And one night in Brazil in 2005, they're sitting around a campfire and they're talking. And around the semi-darkness of this campfire, one of the younger guys, an American missionary in Brazil, leans forward and he says, man, right before we came to Brazil, I was in Kentucky for this youth conference. It's called Summer in the Sun, S-O-N. And they had this speaker that was up there all week, and he was preaching to the students, but I think he just wanted to sound cool to the kids. And man, did this guy water down the Bible, water down the gospel. He didn't say things that were tough to say at times, or I was like, this is where you should say this. He just kind of cowardly, spineless, and it just didn't preach the gospel, didn't preach the Bible. And I think he was getting ready, he was telling us he was getting ready to start a church in like Cleveland, Ohio. And he's kind of like, he raps a little bit too. He rapped for the students, just trying to be cool for these students. His name is Dan Smith. Hey, that's me. Well, little did he know, my father-in-law, Leonard Stone, was on that same missionary trip. And he was sitting around that exact same campfire that night. And as the details unfolded on this guy that he was biting, devouring, snacking in the darkness on a liver over on the other side of the campfire, my father-in-law, Leonard Stone, who's just an awesome dude, he's like 6'3", 70 years old, still swinging an axe to take firewood to people in the poorest county in the country in Kentucky. Servant-hearted, Christian missionary. He leans forward here in the story. He's like, I think he's talking about my son-in-law, Dan. And finally it comes out, he's starting a church in Cleveland, Ohio. His name's like Dan Smith, Don Smith, Tim Smith, something like Dan Smith. And my father-in-law leans forward in the seat, and he leans forward and he says, he's got this, Kentucky accent, this big, kind, but unafraid kind of dude. And he leans forward with this Kentucky laughter. Well, you're entitled to your opinion. But Dan Smith happens to be my son-in-law. And I think I know my son-in-law and his daughter, and his wife, my daughter, a little better than you do. And you know what I'm going to tell you? I've heard him preach on several occasions, and he does not water down the gospel. He preaches the Bible. He talks about, where he came from? And he leans in and just starts giving it to this guy with the flickering light on his face. Had to look scary, like the flashlight effect. And he leans forward. He's like, in fact, I bet my son-in-law Dan has baptized more people than you've seen baptized in your life. And just starts giving it to him. The point of the story is this, guys. I have eyes and ears everywhere. Do you hear me? I'm getting criticized in South America. That's when you know you've arrived, okay? It's like down in South America. People are like, this guy sucks. He doesn't preach the Bible, Galatians 5. That stands for Maroon 5. He doesn't know nothing, that kind of thing. So, man, but what's crazy is this guy thought, I can just cannibalize my own kind, lean forward, eat some liver right here. But the absent were safe. Why? Because person C was like, no. Not on my watch. That's family. That person's family to me. And I'm going to speak up and say, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like the Dan I know. I've heard him preach about Jesus, and he loves students, and he doesn't care about how he looks in front of students, and if they come away saying that dude was really cool or whatever. He wants students to meet Jesus. The absent are safe. I love the way Galatians 5 ends. It's that list of the acts of the sinful nature, the things of the sinful nature. And basically it says, the acts of the flesh are obvious, but the fruit of the Spirit. And it goes into another list. The fruit of the Spirit, what the Spirit will yield in you or produce in you if you will yield to God's Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and faithfulness, and gentleness, meekness, and self-control. I believe in cannibals, but if you yield to God's Spirit, He will produce the fruit of the Spirit within you. Let's pray.